I'd kept that old rifle tucked away for years, but I had no idea if it was made right here in the US. I'd set it up in a tree overlooking the pool on Jackson Ellison's estate. I was just about 70 yards away, close enough to see everything by the pool, where a few lounge chairs were scattered around. My wife Lauren was there too. Her dark brown hair and striking looks had worked for Ellison, and she had recently started spending weekends at his place. This was the 4th weekend in a row she hadn't even bothered to keep it a secret. She told me straight out she planned on getting involved with him whenever his wife Vanessa was off doing charity work. I didn't know if Vanessa was in the dark about all this, but surely the estate staff knew what was going on. Ellison and Lauren were heading towards the pool, he in swim trunks and she in a skimpy top that showed a lot. I'd seen them like this before, so I knew the routine over the past few weeks. I'd taken the time to watch and learn every detail about that estate, but today, I'd finally made up my mind. Lauren and Ellison were a great couple. He was the epitome of a handsome magazine model, with a fit physique that probably had all the women around him swooning. I could see the appeal, but that didn't mean I was okay with it. From the moment Lauren first mentioned her plans, I'd been against it, and she knew it too. After 16 years of marriage and 2 teenage daughters, she decides to throw it all away for this guy. Our Tennessee twin girls, Sandra and Sarah, were 15 now, looking more like their mother every day. They were over at my parents' place, gearing up for football camp, while I was supposed to be biking with my old friend and business partner, Mark Kirby. Mark and I had built a company from the ground up, and we started from scratch and did pretty well for ourselves. He was married to Sally, his childhood sweetheart. It was a funny thing, back in the day, Sally had been both of ours. I never quite got why she chose Mark over me, but in the end I met Lauren in college, and she was everything I thought I wanted. I watched as Ellison and Lauren shared a long hug by the pool, and then leaned in for a kiss. They broke apart. I steadied myself, and a moment later Ellison's chest burst open. His body lurched back from Lauren, who screamed and stumbled, falling to the ground. There was blood everywhere. She crawled to the pool and plunged in, trying to escape what she just witnessed. I'd seen enough. I climbed down from the tree, made my way up the hill and tossed the rifle into some bushes. I stripped off the stock cover and gloves from nearby bushes and put them in a plastic bag, which I then tucked into my belt. I went over to my bike and rode about 3 miles to meet Mark. When I joined him on the trail, we rode together for another 6 miles and eventually stopped at his place. I then took care of the bag in a discreet way. I wasn't worried about the plastic bag in the nearby dumpster. I'd cleaned it thoroughly, and there was no DNA on it. It wasn't the only one I had. A friend who was on his way out gave me 2 rifles and a couple of old pistols years ago. I'd never kept the others in the safe. This one was hidden in the garage, ready for a day like today when Lauren first told me she'd be heading out. When I was out with Ellison, I couldn't stop thinking about that rifle. Over the next week, I took her out to our property under the guise of some target practice. Little did she know, I was actually calibrating it and getting it ready after Mark and I finished the ride and got back to his place. His wife Sally greeted us with cold beers. "How's the ride, guys?" she asked. "Great, quiet track, good," Mark responded. After our workout, we settled by the pool after showering. Sally asked me, "Lewis, how long are you going to put up with Lauren at weekends?" Sally knew the situation. I told both of them what was going on. While she'd advised me to kick Lauren out immediately, Mark had suggested waiting, if only to protect the business and the girls I'd already made. I didn't like guys who messed around with other people's wives, especially not my own. I said I had no idea. "Sally, I'd like to keep this family together." Sally shook her head. "I still think it's time you walked away, Lewis." She and Lauren had never really been close. Even if our families mingled from time to time, Lauren hung out with her country club friends, while Sally was more involved with local politics and book clubs. As I sat there looking back on the past year, I realized that I'd been blind for 20 months. I thought everything was fine and that we hadn't changed, even in the bedroom. She was at our daughter's games, cheering like always. Then one night she told me, "Louise, I'm going to do something and I hope it doesn't ruin things." Ruining things. "I love you." But she trailed off, then added, "I've developed a thing for Jackson. His wife's away every weekend, so I'll be going there starting this Friday. I don't know how long it'll go on." I kept a straight face, didn't let on what I was feeling, but in my head I already knew I wouldn't try to stop her. As for Jackson, he was already a dead man in my mind. As for Lauren, I hadn't yet figured out what would happen there. The rifle in the garage came to mind, and without meaning to, I felt a smile creep onto my face. Lauren noticed and shot me a look, asking what was funny. I replied, still smiling, and that look unsettled her. She hesitated before saying, "No, we haven't done anything yet. Just some kisses. I'll sleep in the..." I told him to let me know when he was done. Then I said, "We'll see what's left of us." I went upstairs to pack a bag for the night. I knew Lauren was sitting in the living room, looking unsettled, but she seemed determined to carry out her plans regardless. It was Wednesday, and she was already looking forward to her weekend with Jackson. He was young, wealthy, and well-educated. She was educated, built like a statue, and had admitted her attraction after catching him shirtless in the office gym. She figured the affair might last a few months, maybe even turn into something permanent. She appreciated the life I'd built for her, but she claimed she needed more excitement. She was convinced that in time we'd somehow work it all out. That night I barely slept. My mind was racing and I kept replaying things. The twins were. I was staying with friends for the weekend, which gave me some space to think and double-check my firearms. By Thursday, my usual lunch at the cafe felt different. I'd sometimes grab a bite there with Daisy Smith, a young woman with an athletic build and dark hair who reminded me of Sally. We'd been exchanging glances and harmless flirtations for weeks, but I'd never considered taking it further until Lauren announced her. On Thursday, I sat in the booth next to Daisy instead of across from her. She was used to attention from men, and noticed right away that I'd changed my routine. I could tell she was pleased. She'd been saving a seat next to her for a couple of weeks, maybe waiting for me to get the hint that she knew I was married. She turned to me, flashing a confident smile, and asked, "Something's different, isn't it?" I smirked and said, "Yeah, my wife decided she'd rather be with her boss." She placed her hand on my thigh and said, "How about dinner and dancing tomorrow night?" I grinned, feeling a bit foolish. She reached over and gently patted my cheek. There was an undeniable attraction, and I couldn't resist any longer. I kissed her lightly on the lips and exchanged numbers before heading back to work. I knew a few folks at the office noticed. When I got home that evening, I was in a different mood. Lauren greeted me with a surprising offer. She asked me to make lasagna and salad. She was trying to make amends, but I was hungry, so I told her thanks, but I'm hungry. She looked puzzled, maybe even suspicious, as if she wondered if I'd already moved on. Once we'd washed up, we sat down to eat. She finally spoke up. "I'm heading to his place tomorrow." I looked at her, keeping my expression steady. "It's not too late to back out," I said. "Lauren, I have a feeling you're going to regret this." She paused, sensing something different in my tone. For a fleeting moment, I saw the old Lauren, but she shook it off. "I need this," I said, smiling a bit colder than usual. "I don't think we're talking about the same kind." "Lauren," she cleared our plates, then tried one last attempt. "Will you come to bed with me tonight?" she asked. "No. I'll see you when you're done with Mark. By then things will be clearer," I replied flatly. She looked disappointed. I think she'd imagined a warm night together to mark the end of this phase in her marriage, but I couldn't play along as I headed out to the guest house. I left her sitting there at the table. I think she was starting to realize what she was risking. I doubted she'd ever see me the same way again, but she had already chosen her path. I wasn't about to get involved. By Friday evening, she'd packed her things before work, slipping a new tight-fitting nightgown into her bag. When she got to the office, Jackson was waiting for her, pulling her in for a kiss. The moment his office door closed, they planned to leave separately to avoid suspicion. By 6 p.m., she was already on her way to his place. He welcomed her with open arms, and she followed him to the master bedroom. He struggled to lift her, a not-so-subtle reminder that he wasn't as strong as me. After some passionate lovemaking, which she found intense yet brief, Lauren seemed convinced they were destined for something deeper. They headed downstairs for dinner, where Jackson had laid out a feast. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he asked, clearly pleased. She replied, and he smiled back, satisfied. She started singing Simply the Best, but the song stirred a twinge of guilt. She and I used to sing that together. Later, they lounged in the bedroom watching a romantic movie. Jackson was eager to move on to more, but she insisted on finishing the movie first. They had one more round of lovemaking, but this time it was more subdued. Meanwhile, I picked Daisy up from her apartment in my classic MGB convertible. She was thrilled to indulge in one of my few vices, looking incredible in a dark red dress with a plunging neckline. I was equally impressed. We had a fine dinner at the Marriott International Hotel, and then went dancing nearby. She was always light on her feet and moved with a sensuality that caught me off guard. She reminded me of Sally, only younger and even more graceful on the dance floor. We danced until a sudden shared impulse made us both want to head somewhere a little more private. Daisy got into my car and gave me a look that said it all. She whispered, "Take me to your place." I managed to keep my cool as I drove us there. 15 minutes later, I opened the door and let her in. We were wrapped up in each other right there in the living room, lost in a kind of intensity. Morning sunlight streamed in. When we woke up, we showered together and had breakfast in the kitchen. Daisy watched me as I made eggs and toast. She finally spoke up, saying, "I have to say it, I'm in love with you." I was surprised, but her words didn't sound hollow. "I think it's mutual." I replied, "It seems like things have changed so quickly." Once we'd finished eating, Daisy looked at me and grinned. She asked, "So, what's next?" I just smiled. "I think I've got an idea," I said, pulling her close again. Meanwhile, Lauren's weekend was going well. I guess she was enjoying herself at Jackson's estate, but I was too wrapped up in my own time with Daisy to dwell on it. Sunday afternoon came around, and Lauren and Jackson agreed to meet again next weekend. For me and Daisy, we were already talking about our next date, which was set for Friday. We planned to have lunch together. Every day that week, I dropped her off at her apartment, marveling at how she, a young lawyer, had managed to get herself such a nice place. Then I headed home, only to find Lauren walking in a moment after I arrived. We looked at each other, and I couldn't help but smile. She noticed right away, so I asked her how her weekend alone had been. I also asked about Richie Rich. I couldn't resist a smirk. If she'd been honest, she might have admitted that Jackson was exciting, but not exactly. Instead, she replied, "He was great. I'll be going back next weekend. The girls won't be home until Sunday night." I could see her plan was falling apart. She was uneasy. I figured she was realizing the girls would soon notice the rift in our family throughout the week. I met Daisy for lunch every day, and we made plans to go to a concert on Friday night, followed by the weekend at her place back at home. Lauren and I communicated in a mechanical, almost business-like way. At work, she and Jackson kept things under wraps, and at home, she seemed to be hoping I'd soften up and come around. There was no chance every night I went to the guest house, leaving her to her own thoughts most evenings. I'd take a walk around the backyard, mapping out Jackson's estate on Google Maps, and using some night vision goggles I'd bought. I even picked up a device that could amplify sound from a distance. I paid her in cash, of course. When the weekend arrived, I had a fantastic time with Daisy. She had to leave for Sunday lunch with her family, so we had a quiet morning together before she left. Then I made a trip over to Jackson's estate to gather more intel. I'd seen Jackson and Lauren by the pool numerous times, and the directional mic I'd set up worked well, though most of their conversations were inaudible. By the third week, the twins were back home, and it was obvious to them that something was up at dinner that Tuesday. Sandra spoke up, "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" Lauren tried to brush it off, saying, "We're dealing with some issues, but don't worry." The girls turned to me, and I decided to be upfront. "The truth is, your mother decided to get involved with her boss, so I moved to the guest house. What happens next is still unclear." Lauren was angry, but there was nothing she could say to deny it. I felt like I needed to know. She started to say something, but Sarah interrupted. "A new man? Huh, sure looks that way. How could you, Mom?" Lauren got up and went upstairs. Sandra looked at me. "Are you getting divorced, Dad?" I sighed. "I don't know yet, but can you two keep this between us for now?" They nodded in unison. "I have to. I've got someone new in my life, too. I'll introduce her to you this weekend when your mom goes to see her boyfriend." The girls were pretty sharp. Sandra said, "So you found someone you really like?" "Maybe. I mean, I wouldn't have met Daisy if your mom hadn't made her choice." Sarah grinned, and Sandra asked, "How did you meet her so quickly?" I shrugged. We'd seen each other at lunch a few times. I guess I felt a bit. I was feeling a bit insecure and wondering if I measured up, but Daisy made it clear she wanted to go out with me. They fell silent, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, so I let them process it. Finally, Sandra asked, "When can we meet her?" "I'll arrange something for this weekend," I said. They nodded, and I added, "Maybe Daisy and I will come. I think it's time." They seemed curious, but a bit worried. I told them not to worry about me bringing her around their friend's parents. Nothing was set in stone yet, but it was clear their mother had changed everything for us. Lauren never came back downstairs that night on Friday. She went to Jackson's estate again and had a decent time. I suspected the excitement was wearing thin, though. Jackson's stamina wasn't quite up to par. Outside the bedroom, their interests were limited. They spent their time on the estate, never going out. It seemed like she was okay with it for now. That same weekend, I took Daisy to a local club. One of her friends, Laura Blake, happened to be there, so we mingled for a while. I had no intention of keeping our relationship a secret. We danced like we owned the floor and then headed back to her place around 1 a.m., 12 a.m. morning. When I got home, the twins were waiting for me. They were sitting in the living room with smiles on their faces. "You girls have a game tomorrow. You should be asleep," I said. Sarah smirked. "We were waiting for you," Sandra chimed in. "You're grinning, Dad. Never mind. Go to bed. Game's at 10. Daisy will be joining us." Daisy arrived early, and there was a brief awkward silence as I introduced her to the girls. "Daisy, this is Sandra, and this is Sarah." She smiled. "Hey, I know this is a little awkward, but maybe we have something in common. I played soccer in college." Sarah raised her eyebrows. "Where?" Daisy replied, catching us all off guard. The girls were impressed. Sarah, who was known for getting into trouble, tossed her a soccer ball, and Daisy showed off a quick trick, keeping up with Sarah. The girls were thrilled, and we headed to the field together. They played hard, taking command of the midfield while Daisy and I cheered from the stands. The game was intense and tied up in the last minutes. Sarah came over and Daisy gave her a quick pointer. "They tried to cut through your side and stay sharp." Sarah nodded, and sure enough, she intercepted the ball, took it down the field, and scored the winning goal. The crowd went wild, and after the game, several parents came over asking about Daisy. One of the parents, Joan Young, even asked if she was coaching the girls. I said, no, I wasn't. Lena Holmes, the girls' coach, recognized her and confirmed she'd played for Notre Dame on the way home. Sandra couldn't resist a comment. "Dad, you know everyone's going to be talking." "Let them," I said with a grin. We stopped for pizza. Then Daisy and I headed to her place for a while before coming back with Chinese takeout. After dinner, Daisy and I were heading to the guest house when Sarah called out, "Keep it down." Daisy laughed and promised to do her best once we left. "I hate what she's done to us, Sarah." I feel the same way, but I think things with Daisy won't be so bad. The next morning, Daisy helped the twins with some soccer practice in the backyard before heading off to visit her parents. I sat with the girls afterwards to talk things over. I told them that even if Lauren and I split, they'd still have both of us in their lives. That afternoon, Lauren walked in, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. She looked at the girls and said, "I want you to know I love you, and I love your dad too." Sarah met her eyes. "That's what you say, but your actions say otherwise." Lauren tried to explain, but Sandra cut in, "Oh, we're not so sure about that." After a tense silence, Lauren awkwardly offered to make dinner. But the mood was still tense over dinner. I asked about the soccer game and the girls told me about Sarah's winning goal. I cleared the table and went to the guest house. Lauren followed me out and said, "Can't you stay the night here? I didn't plan for things to end like this." "Lauren," I replied, "I think it's clear our marriage is done. Stay with Jackson as long as you want, but remember he's all you've got now." I was taken aback by my direct reply, and she let out a single sob. By morning, she seemed to have decided to carry on as though nothing had happened. We both had work to get to, and the girls were getting ready for their trip to my parents' house before heading off to camp. I grabbed lunch with Daisy and filled her in on what had happened after she left. Then I went home to help the twins pack. Lauren's day took a turn when her friend Joanne called Lauren and asked who the young woman was who came with Louis to the soccer game. Lauren was hesitant, and Joanne continued, "The one who used to play soccer pretty too. We all noticed she was there. What were you doing there?" Lauren was trying to stay calm, but her mind was racing. In a company setting, it's not a secret that the guy's always hosting someone when his wife's away. Lauren swallowed hard, realizing Joanne had put the pieces together. "It's not true," Lauren insisted. "I didn't leave. Louis doesn't matter if it's true or not. All I know is Louis brought a younger, attractive woman to the game. And frankly, who could blame him?" Lauren was genuinely shocked that evening. We dropped the girls off. On the drive back from my parents' house, the conversation was pretty quiet. But as soon as we got home, she turned on me and slapped me hard across the face. "You replaced me. You really think you can just swap me out like that?" she shouted. I stepped back, resisting the urge to yell, "What did you expect? You made your choice. How long did you think you could laugh in my face like that? You were probably seeing her all along, weren't you?" I shook my head. "I only knew her from the cafe. We didn't even kiss until you decided to go running off with your boss. So, Lauren, screw you." She stormed off and I went to the guest house after a while. I pulled on dark clothes and snuck out the back door. I had a spot I'd found near Jackson's estate. Tonight I was testing out the sound amplification device up in the tree. I set it up and waited until I spotted Jackson and his. I was standing on their deck, sharing wine under the patio lights. I couldn't help but overhear their conversation. Jackson was laughing and saying it wasn't going to last long. Vanessa was just playing along. She said, "How many now, Jackson? 4 or 5? Jackson just shrugged. He said he preferred the married ones. He likes to see them squirm. He makes sure their husbands know they act tough at social events. But none of them. One day Jackson said, "You'll cross the wrong person." He just laughed, but it was clear he was serious. They're too busy with their families to do anything about it. Vanessa took another sip of wine. "You really are something," she said. "Jackson is good in bed, but he's the biggest jerk on the planet." The conversation faded as they moved inside. But Jackson's arrogance stuck with me until now. I'd questioned whether dealing with him was worth the risk, but after that, there was no doubt. I wasn't sure if it was worth the risk, but after that, I knew it wasn't. The next day, I stopped by Mark's office to talk things over. That week, Daisy and I spent time with the girls. It felt like we were a family. We watched the soccer game on Saturday, and Daisy gave them some more pointers that night. We had an incredible time together. As we lay in bed, she asked, "So what happens next?" I laughed. "If you mean am I still with my wife, the answer is no." "The answer is no, I'm a one-woman man." She chuckled, relaxing in my arms. "It just feels so quick. I mean, after being together for so long." Lauren made her voice. I replied. "And I made mine when she left for her boss. I was done with her. Honestly, it's been a relief." The next morning, we went on a quick jog and then made breakfast. Daisy headed to her parents' place early to help her mom with some elaborate cake project. I told the girls I'd be going for a bike ride with Mark later and gave each of them a hug before leaving. Earlier that week, I'd stashed the rifle by a tree near Jackson's property. It was wrapped and ready to go. As I approached, I half hoped someone had taken it. But everything was exactly as I'd left it. My mind kept going back to that conversation I'd overheard, and to the sight of my own wife kissing that man. I decided I'd had enough. After the ride, Mark and I sat with beers, chatting. Sally came out of the house looking pale. She said, "Jackson Ellison's been shot. He's dead." I stood up quickly, keeping my expression neutral. I asked Lauren, "Is a woman with him?" She said yes, but she's unharmed. Sally replied. Mark took out his phone and checked the news feed, showing it to Sally, who didn't think much of it. My phone was still in Mark's belt bag, so when he handed it to me, I pretended to call Lauren. But there was no answer. "I'd better head home in case anyone calls," I said, grabbing my bike and heading back. When I got in, the landline rang. "Is this Lewis?" a voice asked. "Yes, this is Detective William with the APD. There was a shooting. Your wife was there but wasn't hurt. Can you come down to pick her up?" "Of course. I'll be there in a few minutes. I'll just check in at the front desk." I put on some casual clothes over my cycling gear, grabbed my wallet and keys, and left. I got my wallet and keys and drove to the station, wondering what I'd face. They sent me to a small room where I met Detective William, a fit older guy with gray hair, and his partner, Detective Karen McCormack, a tall brunette who looked sharp. They asked me to walk through my day, and I told them about the bike ride, the stops, and so on. Then they asked some tougher questions. "Did you know your wife was seeing Mr. Ellison?" They asked if I knew about my wife seeing Mr. Ellison. I told them I didn't like it, but I moved on. They asked what that meant. I told them it meant I'd started seeing someone else. They asked if I had an open marriage. I told them I didn't. They asked if I owned any firearms. I told them I did, but I kept them safe. William said, glancing at Karen, "I think we need to look into that." "Okay," I said. "I'll go back with you." They took down the day's events, the people I'd interacted with, and then left me alone in the room for a while. The door was securely locked. I sat there staring at my phone, running through everything in my mind. After about 15 minutes, Detective William returned and asked if they could take a look at my phone. I hesitated. It had work. He said they could get a warrant if necessary, so I handed over the related information, agreeing to let them have it for 30 minutes. They took me to see Lauren, who was wearing borrowed jeans and a t-shirt. I looked at Lauren and asked if she was okay. She said no, and Lewis had been shot. I was right there, and there was blood everywhere. "I'm sorry, Lauren. Once they'd finished with my phone, I'll take you home." She nodded and after a brief pause added, I regret everything. Maybe we can talk on the way home." I gave her a quick hug, and soon enough, the detective returned. "Phone, we left the station in silence in the car." She broke it. "Louis, did you shoot him?" I glanced her way. "No, and I don't regret that he's gone, but I didn't do it." She stared at me, almost as if she didn't believe me. "I know you, Ellis. You're capable of it, but you found someone else, didn't you?" I shook my head. "I didn't have to. Did you actually see it?" "It didn't happen. I heard the shot and then everything exploded." She broke down again, and by the time I reached home, she was exhausted. I let her inside, and then took the police to the weapons safe where they checked over everything, focusing on an unopened box of .30 caliber ammo. After finishing, Detective William turned to me and said, "We'll be checking for DNA and fingerprints. Mr. Bell, I think you should stay out of this. I don't know anything about it and I didn't shoot anyone with that." I went back inside to deal with Lauren before joining her. I called Daisy briefly to explain what had happened and ask if she could come over later. She agreed, and then I called my parents and the girls to fill them in and make sure they were okay. Lauren was still going to camp next week as planned. While I waited, she took a long shower. When she emerged, she looked drained. "It must have been rough, huh?" She managed a small smile. "I've never been so rattled." I offered her some pizza, and she nodded, so I ordered us a couple over dinner. She looked at me, troubled. "I was thinking about everything." "I can't be sure, Louis. I don't think you're innocent." I leaned back and told her I was out biking with Moore. I even told the cops he wouldn't lie to me. Lauren looked skeptical. "Maybe I just think you were angry." "Yes, Lauren. I was angry, but I didn't kill him." After a pause, I added, "Are you asking for a divorce? Maybe. After all these years, I needed something. I thought he was handsome, but he wasn't really. I figured as much." I looked at her bluntly. "So why bring up Daisy? I heard she's younger and athletic." Lauren admitted, "Did she just pick you up?" "It wasn't like that. I met her around the same time you and Jackson did." She started up again. She was quiet for a moment, then asked what happens now. "I may not have a job and you'll probably leave me." I shrugged. "I'll make sure you're taken care of. You might still have a job depending on Vanessa's mood." Just then, Daisy called. I walked into the living room to answer. Lauren was trailing behind, listening as I talked. Maybe she was hoping to catch some hint of my intentions. When I hung up, she came into the room and surprised me by saying, "Let her come, Louis. I think it's time we met." Half an hour later, Daisy arrived. Lauren was now dressed and looked exhausted but pulled together. The two women sized each other up for a long moment. Finally, Daisy broke the silence. "I'm sorry you must be going through a lot," she said. Lauren nodded, weary. "It's confusing," she replied. "You took my husband." Daisy stayed calm. She said, "You left him. That's not my fault." They were about 10 feet apart, and I was nearby just in case. Lauren started shaking, and then suddenly broke into sobs. Daisy stepped toward her and hugged her, letting her cry it out. I was honestly amazed. Daisy helped her onto the couch and sat beside her, keeping close contact. I sat on Lauren's other side, and I put my arm around her, and she gasped for air, still sobbing. "I've been such a fool." When she finally composed herself, she asked me if I thought the hot water was ready. I replied, and she got up to take another shower. Afterwards, she took a sleeping pill and dozed off in our bed. Daisy and I went to the guest bedroom, as neither of us wanted to leave her alone in the house tonight. I watched the 10 o'clock news, which was all over Jackson's murder. It seems he'd had affairs with multiple married women who worked for him in some capacity. I wasn't the only one with a motive. They even hinted at business-related motives, and some were speculating online. By 11, people were saying his wife could have been involved. I turned off the TV and went to bed. We were both too drained for anything else. Morning came, and I checked on Lauren, who slept in until 9. The three of us were at the breakfast table enjoying some pancakes that Daisy had made. Her phone rang, and it was the police requesting an interview with her. I asked her if she wanted me to ask them to come here. She said she'd like that, and Lauren nodded in agreement. We could use an update, so we decided to go ahead with it. 25 minutes later, we all reconvened. In the living room, Lauren looked up and asked if there was any news on who did it. McCormick shook her head, saying there wasn't yet. There are plenty of motives, including Mr. Bell's. She gave me a serious look, and I frowned. I told her thanks for keeping us in the loop. After they left, Sally called to say the police were interviewing her too. They were being polite, but thorough. I told her I'd catch up with Marquette. As we sat on the patio drinking coffee, I could see that Lauren was calming down, but she still looked sad. I could tell that Daisy and I were both bracing for more fallout. Lauren rubbed her temples. I keep seeing him there, lying still. I wonder if that image will ever go away. Daisy reached over and rested a hand on her arm. In my grief psychology course, they said those images fade in. I really hope that's true. Lauren nodded, her voice cracking. Do you have any news from work? I asked. Not yet, she replied. I work directly for Jackson. I handled some of his logistics, showed him a few things, and took care of others myself. Whoever takes over will need someone like me. Do you think it'll be Vesa? Probably, Lauren replied. I witnessed his will. She gets everything except a few. I said, looking at Daisy. Well, I'll leave you to it. I'm not going anywhere. Lauren sighed. Did you stay in the house last night? Daisy nodded in the guest room. Lauren paused, then said with a hint of a smile, I hope you'll stay at least until I'm back on my feet. There was an undertone that neither of us missed, and I could tell Daisy understood. Things will work out, I said. I told her the girls will be back next week. Daisy added, I went to their game, by the way. It was really something. Lauren gave a faint smile, wiping away a tear. I missed it. I feel like such a fool. Jackson had a whole lineup of women he manipulated. All of them. Daisy tried to comfort her. You're not alone. We all make mistakes. He was charming, but you're better than that. I think you've been feeling unhappy for a while. While I was watching Lauren closely at home, I was also thinking about her at work. She nodded slowly and said, That's true. I don't even know when it started. Maybe it was just that feeling that the grass is greener on the other side. She stopped, her face clouding over. But I took it too far and made things worse. She stood up and walked inside, and I heard the clattering of pots and pans soon after. When I checked, I found her baking a chocolate cake, which is a familiar comfort she always turns to when things get rough. Daisy and I eventually wandered into the kitchen, chatting idly as we watched her frost the cake we made. We made sandwiches and snacked while we waited. The day passed quietly. We had burgers for dinner. Lauren made a salad, and the three of us kept busy, skirting around talk of the future by 9:10 to morning. Lauren went to bed, but she had nightmares twice. The second one was so bad I had to go in and calm her down the next morning. Daisy went to work, and I was thinking about going into the office myself. Part of me felt uneasy about leaving Lauren alone, though. While I was deciding, her phone rang. It was Vanessa. Lauren put it on speaker. Are you coming in today? Vanessa asked. I know the situation's tough, but there's work to be done. I can't replace you overnight, but I could really use your help right now. Lauren looked at me and I gave a slight nod. Best case scenario, I'd say he had a habit of fading. Vanessa replied, Let's get to work. They spent the day bringing Vanessa up to speed on everything Jackson had been handling. At around 6, Vanessa glanced up and asked, Can you stay for dinner? We still have a lot to cover, she said. Sure, Lauren replied with a hint of resignation. Vanessa nodded, smiling slightly. Yes, I heard she's pretty. She is, Lauren admitted. She's young, athletic, and my daughters seem to like her. She and Louis really hit it off the night I left. Vanessa looked her over. If you need some company, I could lend you one of my boys. They know how to please. Lauren flushed. Thank you, but I'm not ready for that yet, whenever you are. Vanessa laughed. You know, now that we're running things, maybe some of these guys will have to make room. They finished dinner. When Lauren came home around 9, at 30, she told us a bit about her day. She said she'd been promoted, and that she'd be able to support herself, so she wouldn't be a burden. I tried to offer some comfort, but she interrupted, chuckling. Vanessa offered me a boy toy if I wanted one. Daisy gasped, amused. Really? What do they look like? I felt a flicker of annoyance, but I kept quiet. Lauren shrugged. I didn't know she even had them over for the next 6 weeks. Lauren worked closely with Vanessa, becoming invaluable. About 2 weeks into the business, I started the divorce process, which didn't come as a shock to her or the girls. Vanessa hired me a lawyer, but the arrangements were simple enough. We agreed quickly a few weeks later, and it was all finalized. The girls stayed with me, and Daisy moved in and took on a motherly role with ease. Our home began to feel more settled, and everyone found a comfortable rhythm. One night after an especially tender evening, I turned to Daisy and I asked her, Would you want to get married? She tensed up a little, then smiled as we kissed. I'd love to. I want children too. She looked at me with a mix of joy and nerves, and I hugged her tightly. I'm ready to dive back into nappy duty. We got married 6 months later, and Daisy was pregnant within a couple of months. Meanwhile, the police investigation into Jackson's murder hit a dead end and slowly faded from public view. The authorities had thoroughly checked all the suspects' alibis. They even questioned Vanessa, but her alibi, that she was with 2 men miles away, held up in the end. The case went cold, barely mentioned by the media except for the occasional article. Meanwhile, Lauren continued to thrive at work, becoming Vanessa's right-hand woman. One Saturday, while she was at Vanessa's home, she finally confronted her fear of the pool. Vanessa brought her out to the poolside, where 2 handsome men, one black and one white, both well-built, waited. Vanessa nudged her. "You haven't relaxed in ages, take your pick." After a moment, Lauren dropped her robe, introduced herself to one of the men, Damon, and let herself go. That day, she put her fear behind her. Lauren's life shifted dramatically, but she found a sense of fulfillment. Sundays were family days sometimes. She was genuinely happy for us, and I could see a trace of longing in her, though she was genuinely happy for us. Not long after Daisy became pregnant with our daughter, our family grew, and life found its way back to a new peaceful normal. One evening, Sally and I were walking. We stopped by the guest house and she turned to me with a knowing look. "You know, Daisy and I get along really well. I'm glad you're happy. In fact, you could have had me." She nodded, a glint in her eye. "I know, but I chose Mark. You always had that hidden anger, Louis. You tried to hide it, but I saw." Even then I looked at her, not surprised but thoughtful. She said, "You think I should get some counseling?" I laughed. "No, Louis. This is you, and it always has been. But remember, Mark and I still love you." The months passed, and life moved on quietly. The Ellisons case fell further into the past, rarely mentioned. Daisy and I settled into a comfortable life, thrilled. As our family grew, Lauren became a key part of Vanessa's company and found a way to embrace her own unique happiness. The twins adapted well, supported by both of us, and life continued, with new connections being formed and old wounds being healed. We each found our path, rediscovering a new balance that allowed us all to live, thrive, and finally let go of the past.